Hello, everybody. This is Mike, and I'm back with yet another episode of my podcast. And in this episode, I have Mr. Eric Helms back on the show, as we promised quite some time ago. But hey, here we are. And he has returned to talk about how to quote-unquote bulk properly. In other words, how to gain as much muscle and as little fat as possible. Now, in case you don't know Eric, he is first and foremost one of my favorite guys in the evidence-based fitness space. But aside from that, he's also a member of the 3DMJ coaching team and is himself a professional natural bodybuilder and an actual truly natural bodybuilder, I will add, and strength athlete, as well as an author and credentialed scientist with a number of peer-reviewed papers under his belt. In fact, he's working on his PhD right now, so soon he will be Dr. Eric Helms. Now, I've referenced Eric's work quite frequently in my own writing, so it's always a pleasure to talk with him and pick his brain about the science of making gains. And to that point, as I said earlier, in this interview, we are going to talk about how to gain muscle quickly without just getting fat. Now, as you probably know, some fat gain is inevitable during a proper bulking season, but most people make a handful of common mistakes that not only sabotage their efforts to gain muscle, but also really just set them up for a long, grueling post-bulk cut that in many cases more or less wipes out the progress that they made. Now, the good news, though, is when you know what you're doing, you can actually gain significant amounts of muscle without gaining large amounts of body fat, and it's really not as hard as many people think. As you would expect, Eric does a great job breaking it all down in this interview, where he explains these big mistakes that many people make and then dives into the simple science of making quote-unquote lean gains. So if you want to know how to gain strength and size without packing on pounds of fat, then you definitely need to listen to this interview. So here it is. Eric, thanks for coming back on the show despite being a little bit under the weather. I appreciate it.
Hey, man. You got to get sick sometimes, apparently. But thanks for having me back on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. All right. So the first time around, it was all about on-season, particularly prepping for shows, cutting, and so forth. And this part two, which people have been asking for, is we want to focus on off-season. And so for those of you listening that aren't competing, this would also apply. You know, what you would think as bulking is kind of like going to be the topic of discussion. And, so I was thinking, Eric, that we just dive right in with what are some of the common mistakes that people make when they go, okay, I don't need to be super shredded anymore. And I want to gain really focus on gaining muscle and strength. And then where does it kind of go off the rails from that point? You know, what have you seen in your experience?
Sure. It typically comes down to basically two different camps, and they're normally differentiated by who do they follow. You know, like if you've got people who came up reading muscle magazines or the 2017 equivalent, and they are basically following bodybuilders, typically they overdo it. They'll kind of go on a sea diet, a seafood diet where they're eating everything. They're gaining a lot of weight very quickly. And they go on basically a go mad diet or something where they're eating everything and they're gaining a lot of weight and a large part of it is body fat. Mm-hmm. And very quickly they're running out of room to continue bulking. And they may be putting on effective muscle mass, but the time frame that it can last before they start getting uncomfortable with their body is short. And can
you talk a little bit more to that point of that time frame? Is it just about comfort? Because I've spoken with a lot of people that they don't really care. They just think if that's what it takes, like if I just have to kind of be a little bit disgusted with myself for half the year, then I'll do that. But is it just that, the psychological, or is there also a physiological element there?
Oh, there's definitely both. If you're a drug-free person with any kind of experience underneath your belt, the amount of muscle mass you can be able to put on and the rate that it can get put on is typically slower than what you might be told in the mainstream kind of bodybuilding information. So you're going to have, the idea that you can put on a pound a week and have that be relatively clean weight, when in reality it might be more like a pound a month that's going to be clean.
How would you say, is that for beginners or intermediates or that number there?
Really, the range I like to use is about 0.5 to 1.5% of your body weight per month is a decent rate to try to focus on gaining.
Okay. And you'd say what the higher is for the newer you are, the more you're going to be on the higher end of that?
Yeah, basically it scales to your training age. So the faster rate you gain, you should be lowering your training age, because the closer you get to your genetic ceiling, the harder it's going to be to put on muscle at that rate. Okay. So definitely.
Cool.
Yeah. That's the one big issue is on that side of the fence. On the other side of the fence is people who kind of came up following, like, Martin Birkin, or basically anyone who's talking about how to be lean all the time and how to get six-pack abs. And their problem is that they often don't have a base at all. That their first introduction to fitness was trying to get leaner, whether they were overweight or not, or just not as lean as they wanted to be. The physiques they saw, the information that was emphasized to them was always, here's how you can maintain leanness or get lean in the first place and do it with less effort. And they've never actually had a proper, true period where they're trying to gain muscle. And they're often not satisfied with the results when they cut, because they don't really have a lot of muscle to show for it.
And can you just speak quickly to why when you say lean gains, you obviously think of Burkham, but that is kind of the concept, right? Is that, like, you can keep your body fat at 10% and still gain muscle, why that doesn't work as well as many people hope?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I think the big problem is that a lot of people just want to have a certain level of leanness in their mind because they've been told it's maintainable. So, I can't tell you how many times I've Skyped with someone for a consultation, and they tell me, "Hey, this is my my fourth time trying to cut down to 8% body fat," and each time they get there, but then they can't stay there.
Yeah.
And they think it's their approach, that if they just use a different diet, or if they reverse diet, or if they what have you, they'll be able to maintain it. But in reality, it's just like, dude, your set point's like 15%, and until you accept that, you're just going to be, struggling and focused on food and not making great gains and having a relatively suppressed hormonal system and sleeping poorly.
Yeah.
So it comes down to they have to accept that their walk around physique may be just not quite as lean as they'd hoped, which can take years for some people.
Not insta worthy, right?
Right. Yeah. So not something people like to hear, but something they need to hear if they actually want to make progress.
Right.
And then the second part of that, relevant to what we're talking about, is that they can learn that a 15% body fat physique in this example is going to look better over time if they actually put in the years and actually spend some time not trying to cut, but actually building a good physique. And, someone with a lot of muscle mass at 15% body fat looks pretty good. That's the type of person that, would definitely be comfortable taking their shirt off at the beach.
Yeah.
So yeah, these people have typically spent much more time cutting than they have actually gaining. And normally I talk them into going, right, we need to set like a minimum time ratio limit of, time spent in a surplus versus time spent in a deficit. And I normally tell them, like, the minimum should be like 4 to 1. So for every, 4 months of time spent in a surplus is 1 month you've earned yourself in a deficit.
Yeah, I like that. Where I'm sure you get asked about mini cuts and mini bulks a lot. I know I do. I've spoken a bit about it, written a little bit about it, but actually probably would be good to just have one single article I could send people to, because I still get asked about that. In my experience, it just doesn't work well. And I don't know actually if this is something you would probably be able to illuminate more than I would, but it seems like there's something to momentum when you're in a surplus, and after it takes a few weeks, it seems like, for your body's muscle building machinery, so to speak, to really be firing on all cylinders. It's not just like, the first day that you're in a surplus, all of a sudden you're really feeling it in your workouts, and you just, it takes a few weeks. But if you're always flipping between deficits and surpluses, it seems to screw that up.
Yeah, I can't think of any physiological reason as to why the first few, the early part of a lean gaining period wouldn't be effective. But I know people, if they have unrealistic expectations of one of these shortcuts, let's say you take that approach, that 4 to 1 approach, and you do 4 months of time spent in a gaining period and then a 1 month cut. Not a whole lot's going to happen in a month.
Yeah.
And if it does, it's probably not a good thing. It probably wasn't just
You're talking about you can take off a few pounds, like
yeah. If you lost 10 pounds in a month, that probably wasn't all fat.
Right.
Unless you just have amazing fat loss genetics.
Yeah.
And so I think the way I try to sell these mini cuts, if you will, is that it's to allow you to continue going in your surplus afterwards. So it's controlling fat mass accrual in the process of a long-term gaining period versus I bulk for 4 months, now I'm gonna get shredded in a month.
Yeah.
Like that's often the next pitfall that you run into from the people who kind of come from that I want to be lean all the time crowd, is because that's still part of their goal. Even if they've come to accept that maybe they need to try to be not so lean and they need to spend more time building their physique, that, okay, I've done that. Now can I get back to what I want to do? And that's when you kind of got to convince them, like, look, if you want to do a photo shoot, or if you want to do a competition, or if you want to, get ready for something, if you want to give yourself kind of a goal, we can do that. But we need to have a longer cut to do that, and we need to get you built up so that when you do it, you'll look good. And this little 1 month thing is just to control fat mass gains while you're, building your base.
Yeah, totally. It's that work you have to do up front to kind of. You could look at it in the perspective of if it's a lifestyle thing, or use a financial metaphor, or whatever metaphor you want to use. But it's just that work you have to put in, and you just have to put in your time. And things aren't the way you want them to be. It could be, I don't know, it could be a year, it could be 2 years, depending on what the person, how they want to look. But then the payoff is, okay, you've done that, and now you're in that position, right, where you can, if you want to stay lean year round, then there's of course a trade-off, but you can do that. You're not going to stay 6% year round, at least not naturally. But if you really want to have, the beach body or whatever, but you have to pay the price first.
Yeah, and I don't even think you're going to be staying 6% year round if you're on gear. That's not going to help you. There's.
Oh yeah, no, it's not good for you. But you go scroll around Instagram and you'll see it. There are guys doing it.
Yeah, well, there's no reason that like just hopping on gear is going to help you be leaner.
Oh sure.
It'll help you hold more muscle or anything like that. But I have talked to people who are like, they end up going down the drug route just because they can't figure out how to do it, and they think that's magic. And I think that typically does more harm than good. Anyway, that's just not really my bag anyway, so I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert there. But
sure.
But yeah, you're 100% correct. Is that we could make an entire podcast about people who are attempting to maintain a leaner body weight than they probably should, and then it's realistic, and that is probably more of a psychological issue than it is anything else. And certainly, I think it's important to present it as a settling point. The body fat you can maintain, and probably a settling point range that can change over time, because a big part of that is not just physiological, it's also psychological and sociological. And as you get better at, like you said, incorporating new habits into your lifestyle, you may find you can maintain a lower body fat percentage. But that's something that does take time, and it takes years of kind of incorporating different habits when you go out to eat, tracking and adopting quote unquote intuitive behaviors that are actually heavily learned and integrated. They're not really that intuitive. Then maybe 15% moves down to 12% in a few years of you being in, and that's cool. I've actually run into a few people who can maintain lower than is probably ideal for gaining a muscle mass, and they have to become aware of that. That they're actually quite controlled and they manage their environment very well, but at the cost of maybe holding on to more muscle or being able to build more muscle. So that's always something to consider. And by far, I'd say those two kind of camps are where the two biggest mistakes I run into. And I'm either finding myself convincing the perma bulkers to take a little more control and a little more patience and be a little more moderate in their approach to gaining, or I'm convincing the 6-pack abs year-round crew that maybe they need to have more realistic and individualized expectations for themselves.
Yeah, makes sense. So what about on the other side of the coin here, on the training side? Are there any common mistakes that you see there?
Yeah, I think more often than not, on the training side, people just think that that there needs to be a huge difference between what they're doing when they're cutting or bulking, and really the principles remain the same. It's just that you can probably handle a little more volume, you can deload just not quite as frequently. I mean, there's some really old school thoughts out there that you need to be lifting, heavy when you're bulking, like
Mm-hmm.
fives and
Yeah.
sixes and
Yeah.
eights.
And then you go light
And
when
then,
you're cutting, so you really bring out the
right.
striations and all that shit.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know how worthwhile it is busting that myth, because I think that's more like if early 2000s, 90s things. I just don't run into a lot of people who still
That's like
think
when I
that.
first picked up, when I first lifted a weight, I think that was that was like pretty commonly, like that was what you did. You ask someone in the gym, that's what you do. But that has...
Same. Yeah, that was, for me, that was like 13 years ago, like the last time that was probably a rather popular belief. So there's that. But basically the principles of training remain the same in a deficit or a surplus, because it's always doing the same thing. You are, creating a signal for muscle gain. And, that's either supported by your nutrition or it's not, and it'll be more or less effective because of that, but it doesn't really change it. And then you just have to think about, okay, is my recovery going to be hampered from my nutrition, or will it be aided or at least not hampered? And that should, dictate some of the decisions you make in terms of how you modify your training volume, intensity, frequency, etc. But, yeah, I think
Have you
another one
seen,
is,
like, something I've seen is not working, like not doing enough actually, while like trying to follow a very minimalist program while bulking. I mean, in some cases it's bad, where it's like a program that's just upper lower, that's it, 2 workouts a week. And yeah, they're longer workouts, but and they're rather intense workouts, sure, but it's still just 2 workouts a week while bulking, or maybe 3 max 4. Anyways, to that point of where, I mean, I've seen that. I don't know if you've seen that, where it's like, okay, if you really want to maximize, you're gonna have to work a bit harder. You know what I mean? Especially because you're not brand new to this.
yeah, again, it seems to come down to where did they get their information from.
Yep.
So, like, the kind of what goes hand in hand with some of the, I would say, Martin Birkin inspired kind of approaches. And I don't want to sound like I'm hammering Martin Birkin, but really there's been a lot of offshoots from him. There's been a lot of people who basically, kind of copied what he's done.
Actually, almost copy pasted. Actually, in some cases,
literally, yeah. You know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
And again, their approach is what he used, which makes sense for what they're doing. Like if I'm trying to maintain a low body fat and I'm always in a like kind of a maintenance phase at best, or a cut, then I probably do want to take a lower volume approach and maybe focus more on like the tension stimulus. That's a fair argument. And so you'll see that. You'll see I train 3 times a week in alternating upper lower fashion, and I use 3 sets of 4 to 6 per muscle group, and that's it, 1 exercise. And that's probably an adequate stimulus to maintain for an intermediate person, but for the average person with a couple years under their belt who's looking to optimize muscle gains, it's just not enough volume. It might be decent for strength gain, but I'd like to see someone getting at least 10 sets per muscle group per week, spread across at least 2 sessions per week as a decent kind of starting point. Mm-hmm. And then from there, if we're progressing, fantastic. Modify if it doesn't change. So that does happen. It's not, again, it's kind of specific to that crowd. Okay. On the other end of the spectrum, you get the people who came up listening to, IFBB pros, and depending on who they're listening to, they may have kind of this not really focused on progressive overload mindset. Where it's
a 2-hour arms day of like.
And it's I'm not a weightlifter. I don't care about how much weight I move or getting from point A to point B. I want to feel the muscle work. And I'm like, well, okay, so long as you can do that and have an objective system for progressive overload over time, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it's like kind of like whatever you want to tell yourself, that's cool. But as long as we're doing this over here, it's whatever you want to think about.
Totally. Yeah. Because, I mean, it's not like they don't make any valid points. Certainly you want to make sure that you're not just like throwing tin around it and just lifting as heavy as you can all the time. I mean, it's not A or B. It's finding like, okay, I do want the target muscle working, sure. And progressive overload is the key critical component to progress. So how can we systematically ensure that it occurs? And that's basically the 2 things you don't see. It's people doing too little, like you said, or just doing everything but without structure. So I think just generating structure in general is typically very helpful to people who've been struggling with actually building muscle.
Okay. And anything regarding cardio? Do you come across that? Doing too much or,
Well, for often your female listeners, this is relevant to them for the most part in my experience. And also, again, I'm just hammering the lean gains crowd, the Martin Birkin people.
I can see the headlines now. I can see the fake news now.
But the funny thing is, this is nothing that Martin has really directly promoted. It's more of the audience he attracts.
Yeah.
And I think that's something anyone who puts out information is going to be, I would say, a victim to some degree, or has to be aware of, that the information you put out will not always be received in the way you want it to be. It will often sometimes be used by people who kind of already have that filter and bias and want to basically keep doing what they're doing without changing anything until they really start to run themselves into the ground or see a lack of progress. But anyway, yeah, so I often run into females who are a little intimidated by the prospect of putting on some body fat, and are often doing a lot of cardio, probably more cardio than most of your average male fitness person would do during a cut.
Yeah.
Just kind of as a baseline.
Yeah.
So cutting that down is really, again, getting around kind of their psychological fear of, well, if I don't do this, what's going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
And same thing with the guys who are very focused on the kind of the six-pack abs. So that is one mistake. And then sometimes in the modern age, you'll run into people who are very sedentary, and just they're a student and they take online classes, or they're an office worker, or really they just don't have much energy expenditure. And you actually do need a little bit of cardio in there just to kind of have a consistency of energy intake, or to just make it easier for them not to gain weight too fast.
Yeah.
But that's actually something that is pretty specific to the individual as to far as just what their baseline activity is, and how sedentary they are.
It's relevant to a lot of people listening. I know a lot of people are in that position where most of us work at a desk.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, and sometimes people create the scenario, like you said, if they're only training twice a week, they feel like they have to do cardio to, not
just to be able to eat some food.
Right. But if they were to go from, say, 2 hours of training a week to 4 hours of training a week, all of a sudden, not that they should do that overnight. And I would say, to kind of give a little disclaimer to people who are listening to this and going, oh, I'm not training enough, is like, build up like 10% more volume, over time, add one session. If I did first, I'd take the 2 sessions, like you said, that may have a lot of time spent in them, and just break those up into 3. Mm-hmm. And then from there, if you're still not gaining at probably an appropriate rate, or if you're still plateaued, then you could make like a 10% increase in volume.
Yeah. So like people listening, let's say if you're doing an upper lower, maybe you could turn that into a push-pull legs type of setup to break it up into 3, for example.
Certainly. Yeah. And then, if you wanted to get that frequency up a little higher, you can go, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and then go push-pull legs, and then have like a full body day on Saturday or Sunday or something like that, with lower volume and a little heavier weights, and then get a little more volume on the other days. That way you're hitting that kind of 2 times per week frequency, strength and hypertrophy stimulus, all the good stuff.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, good. So I think those are the major mistakes and just kind of misguided ideas that people have. So let's circle back around and talk about how to do it right. Do you want to just start on the diet and nutrition side of things? Certainly.
Yeah. So I think the big one is realizing that there's a direct relationship between the calories you take in and the rate of weight that you gain. So if our goal is to gain, 0.5 to 1.5% of our body weight per month, that's really, less than 0.5% of our body weight per week. So the average, let's say, 170-pound male, that's not a lot of body weight you're trying to gain per week. And if you need roughly a 500-calorie surplus per day to get roughly a pound of tissue gain, that means you're only going to want like a 100 to 300-calorie surplus, depending on how big you are to start, and what your training age is. So if you're 5'6" and you're a intermediate, it's going to be a small surplus. If you're 6 foot and a beginner, sure, you might have like a 400-calorie surplus to get you in the right position. And then the second question becomes, okay, well, if I'm only trying to gain a little bit of weight over time and it's a small surplus, how do I even track that? And the way to do that is looking at longer time periods. So I'll often tell people to look at like a 14-day body weight average and compare that to the next 14-day period. And then you're working with, let's say you're trying to gain, a pound a month. You can look at a 14-day average and see whether or not you're up, half a pound, or close to it. Say 0.4 to 0.6 or 0.3 to 0.7 pounds. And if you're in that range, then you're thumbs up. You're in the sweet spot. If it's too low or too high, then you can make a small calorie bump by say like 50 or something like that, and just kind of nudging it in the right direction, because you're not looking for too much.
And just to that point, for people listening, the problem with this in particular, with just trying to use the mirror is, you're not really going to see that much of a difference week to week if you're not tracking your weight like what you're talking about, especially with working out an average like that, and you're just trying to go off of like, do I look bigger? That's not going to serve you very well.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the last time I was able to look in the mirror as a drug-free lifter and assess whether or not I was bigger was in like the first year of my training.
Yeah.
And then, after that, I really can't. I kind of have a moment of reflection where I go, wait a minute, I'm 215. Last time I was 215, I couldn't see my abs, and so I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, so that's the kind of thing where that's like years apart, or before I notice, gains, or the other scenarios are when I actually diet down for a bodybuilding show. And there's no body fat to obscure my physique at all, and I can look from 2009 to 2007 or 2011 to 2009 and see what progress I've made.
Yeah.
But obviously that's not a way to assess, for the general pop. Like, was your gaining phase successful? Well, just diet down until you're shredded, and then you see.
And then you'll see.
Just take 6 months after you're done bulking and get diced. That's probably not a useful, like kind of tool to put in your tool belt. So assessing progress. Primarily, what you want to focus on is the ingredients that will result in gaining muscle mass, rather than just, am I getting muscle?
Yeah.
So, are you in a surplus? So you're gaining tissue. Do you have an appropriate amount of, volume and frequency and intensity in your training program? And is progressive overload occurring? And if those three things are happening, then you can probably be sure that the most percentage of that weight you're gaining that can be lean muscle is. And if you're not satisfied with it and you're doing everything right, then it's just a matter of coming to terms with the fact that you're not a beginner anymore, which is tough. I remember when I thought I was doing something wrong for many times when I moved from the beginner to the intermediate phase, and often I was, because I was still a relative beginner and didn't know what I was doing. But many times I was changing things just because I was still expecting to gain like a newbie.
Yeah.
And falling in love with kind of the training approach I had at the start, because that was the rate of gain that I was now accustomed to and expected. Being frustrated by anything less than that, and that is quite the mental hurdle for people moving from, the kind of the honeymoon phase. So, just something to think about for people who are been lifting for maybe more than 6 months seriously, and they're just starting to notice that the progress is not the same that it once was. So on the nutrition side, the first piece is really making sure that your surplus is appropriate. And probably not as much as you think. And then how do you track that is by looking at, say, 14-day averages or even monthly averages and making small changes over time to push you in the right direction or pull you back if you're gaining too quickly. Mm-hmm. And then, I don't know that you really need to track your protein, carbs, and fat like I would probably recommend for anyone doing a serious cut. But I would say you want to make sure that you're getting in at least enough protein, during this period. And also eating a relatively healthy diet. So I tend to focus more on, okay, am I getting in at least roughly, say, 0.8 grams per pound of protein, or more is fine.
Yeah.
And then am I getting in, a serving of fruit and vegetables each per every 1,000 calories I'm consuming as a minimum. And certainly, more than that, extra credit is fine.
Yeah. Do you even go a little bit further and choose your fruits and vegetables specifically, or are you just looking for just make sure I get some leafy greens and a variety of fruits, or?
I'm a big fan of just variety is the spice of life, and to ensure you're covering your bases nutritionally. So I'm not one to tell people like you have to get an apple, a banana, berries, and et cetera, because these phytonutrients. More so, it's just a matter of variety is good. Probably want to have kind of that decent 80-20 rule, to where 80% of your foods are single item ingredients, quote unquote clean, if you will.
Yeah,
but
stuff that you have to produce. It doesn't come in a package.
Exactly. And then the other 20% is whatever you want, really, so long as you're still meeting those requirements of getting in your micronutrients, getting in enough protein, and gaining weight, which is basically your surrogate for an energy surplus.
Right.
And going back to the issues people have, sometimes they'll come to me and they're eating too clean and they're eating too high of protein, and a high water, high fiber, high protein diet is one of the most satiating diets you can have. Mm-hmm. And satiation is useful to a point. But when you're actually trying to gain weight, that can actually become a barrier.
Yeah.
So sometimes I will tell people, all right, I want you to eat no more than 0.8 grams a pound of protein. We'll put you at kind of the lower end. And let's go from like an 80-20 to like a 70-30 and get some more, Chipotle in there, or whatever we need to do, burrito gains. So what do we need to put down so you can gain weight more easily? More palatable food, essentially.
Yeah.
So some of the opposite rules to what you'd probably want to do while trying to avoid excess fat gain or actually trying to cut. So that's one of the things that's kind of been lost in the kind of new age. If it fits your macros, is that sure, you can fit anything into your diet, but do you want an entire diet of highly palatable foods that actually makes you hungrier or less satiated? Because that makes it actually harder to follow your diet.
And starves your body of vital nutrients that keep you disease and dysfunction free, if that matters.
Yeah, it should. And then it definitely should matter. And some people will find crazy ways to, like, I get my fruits and my vegetables, I take a green supplement and a multivitamin, and then I have ice cream for, 30 to 40% of my calories.
That's actually common. So if you want to speak to that quickly, you see that all over, especially social media. Well, that's what they tell themselves. They're like, that's even going a little bit further. Honestly, what I see more of is like Chipotle over and over and over and ice cream, but multivitamin. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's, if there was a time to do that, it probably would be during a gaining phase for someone who struggles to gain weight.
Right.
That'd be like a decent remedy to that. Because
and now this is just like daily life. This is not because of
No, daily life, I would advise that. Like, like if you truly can find a way to get all the phytonutrients, your fiber, and have decent nutrient spread to ensure that all the zoo and phytonutrients are in there and micronutrients are covered, and you're getting blood work done to confirm it, and you feel good, fine, go for it. But I have a tough time believing that's actually occurring.
Yeah, that means that you have to eat certain kinds of foods, right? Especially if we're talking soluble fiber, fruits and vegetables.
Yeah.
Like, where else are you going to get it?
Correct. Yeah. So anyway, food quality is important, but don't forget satiety. That's kind of the wrap up to that little rant we both had. In terms of nutrition.
I want to say one more thing on that. So, I think it's also funny that it's in a lot of cases people are it's almost like they're gloating about how they can eat this or eat that, or it's become like the cool thing, especially on social media, to kind of eat like shit, but at least stay relatively lean or, have some sort of a physique. And then other people will celebrate it and, we need more of this. Or they tell themselves, I'm just not going to feel guilty about food anymore. I'm just going to eat the fucking hamburger every day. And, now I don't have any psychological associations one way or another. It's just macros and shit. I think that I would challenge someone like that to almost do like a Whole30. Like, you have to eat super clean for 30 days. That actually takes more. I think that should be more celebrated, because what do we? So you learned a bit. You learned dieting 101, and now you just eat a bunch of shit food because you can. I don't understand what's cool about that. It doesn't require anything. It doesn't require any willpower. It doesn't require any. It's just stupid. It actually requires like ignorance, really, of how the body works and why nutrition is important. So I almost like want to create a more flexible, kind of not retarded Whole30 and make that a thing. And here's a challenge. How about you eat really, really well for 30 days, and then you might actually be surprised at how much better you feel. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I look at that a lot of the times, and I probably sound like like a parent with a teenager, and I go, "Oh, look, they're in that phase." That's what I think when I see those posts. Because I remember going through the same thing when I first started, where I had certain misconceptions about what I had to do nutritionally and what my primary variables I should focus on. And when I really realized, oh man, a huge part of this does come down to calories in, calories out, and having a good macro spread and being consistent with that. And realizing that I didn't have to eat just a list of 6 foods. And so you tend to go to the other way. And then you may even feel like resentful towards the fitness industry that told you had to eat, broccoli, chicken, rice, oats, and
tilapia.
And cottage cheese, but only after 8 p.m. kind of thing. And so you go on this like, look what I can do kind of thing. And It's very
rebellion.
much akin to, yeah, it's akin to when you know your freshman year of college and you start to read about, U.S. foreign policy, and you become basically like a revolutionary for at least a semester before, you get that out of your system. So I see it as kind of the same way. And sure, that's fair enough. And I think there was a time when it was valuable. My colleague and close friend and business partner, Alberto Nunez, was the guy who popularized the Pop-Tart in the fitness industry by just taking pictures of him eating it on a regular basis. And in 2007, 2008, 2009, that really was challenging the idea that you could never have anything that wasn't on the approved list.
Yeah.
And I think he saw value in going, right, I'm leaner than the leanest, everybody. And there was kind of this message of, yeah, you can get lean with if it fits your macros, but you won't ever get to like top tier pro level
I
conditioning.
remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was kind of this kind of internal fight, and I know that some of the people on the side of trying to share the meals they had when they were eating dirtier were just kind of going, and just trying to create a little challenge some of the preconceptions people had, and I think there was value in that, but I don't know that anyone informed really still thinks that you can't get lean, unless you're eating really, really clean food. So I don't know if there's value in it today. I think moderation should be emphasized more rather than kind of bouncing between the two ends. So I largely agree with you.
Yeah, no. I remember when a lot of that stuff was going around actually from Alberta. When it was he must have been prepping for a competition, or he was he was like skeleton lean. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Jacked Holocaust victim.
All right, cool. So that's the calories, that's the macros, a bit on the nutrition side. One other thing that might be worth touching on quickly is just because I have come across a lot, I'm sure you have as well, where people, if you're going to go and eat out and they don't quite understand how many calories are in a lot of restaurant foods, and because they're bulking and they feel like they don't really have to watch things as closely, they fuck up in that way, and they don't realize that, like, yeah, that dinner was good. That was like 6,000 calories with fucking 300 grams of fat. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's the easiest way for shit to sneak up on you is that, palatable food in restaurants typically has, just the average person I've talked to, twice as much calories and twice as much fat typically, because you can sneak in oils and butters. Yeah. And portion sizes, we don't, like, people will eat what's on their plate for the most part.
Yep.
Regardless of the plate size. We don't really eat just purely by what makes me satiated, unless we're very aware of that and are training ourselves to do that. Which, hey, obesity epidemic. So even those of us in the fitness industry who probably won't ever become obese are still affected by that to some degree.
Right.
And so yeah, you looking up a meal at Applebee's on MyFitnessPal may be right, but it's not like the cook the line cook in the back is going, he's like, oh, he's making your pasta dish, and then he goes, hold on, let me check MyFitnessPal.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. This should only be 1,200 calories. This one's actually 2,000. I need to remake it. No, you're going to get a 2,000 calorie meal. And next time you might get 1,800. And next time after that, it might be 2,100 calories. So, the people at restaurants are not busting up the food scale for you.
Their job is to make the food taste as good as possible. And that means oil, butter, cream as a base. Whatever you can work those into things, they get tastier. That's right.
So, and not that you should be bringing a food scale to the restaurant. It's just that you need to have some system of accounting for that.
Right.
Now, if you're tracking your body weight over time, you will very quickly realize your mistake because it will go up faster.
Yeah.
But, you don't want to be the guy or gal who is finding that out after the fact or not knowing where that's happening. Like if you're consistently thinking, I'm doing a good job when I go out to eat and, I'm tracking it, maybe I need to modify my nutrition outside of, the restaurant. You're basically, aiming at a secondary culprit to the problem. Mm-hmm. And, if you're eating, let's say 5,000 calories on that day, like you said, and only 1,500 of it's outside of the restaurant, trying to reduce 1,500 slightly is going to have a much smaller impact than trying to reduce 3,500.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say there's nothing wrong with eating out. You just need to have a realistic idea of what is actually in what you're ordering, and probably still order from the healthier, smarter options for the most part. just so that you can be a little more confident that your tracking is accurate. Because really, it's the mixed dishes with a lot of fat, butter, or oil, cream, and
or certain
and
meats,
buttery
obviously
sauces.
sausages and bacon
Right.
and
Certain cuts of
ground
meat are
beef and
very high in fat, exactly, and that's where it gets snuck in. It's easy to estimate the protein and carbohydrate content of a meal out. It's difficult to estimate how much fat's in there, and that's typically where you're going to be surprised when you see the macros. You're like, whoa, that's twice as much fat as I thought.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's basically. It will be
Desserts
taken
too
care of.
can be really
Yeah.
a lot more than you think.
Right. Yeah. For the most part, someone who is, careful about their food intake and very conscious of trying to gain muscle and, keep their body fat levels under control. Appetizers and desserts should be a rare thing, not the common thing.
Right.
Because it'll just help you meet your nutrition targets. Unless you're someone who just has a ridiculous energy expenditure level. Yeah. And then it might be a matter of eat whatever the hell you want and then make sure you're eating enough. But that's not everybody, and it certainly is probably the exception rather than the rule.
Totally. One other thing that's just probably worth throwing out there that I'll like to do is I do all of what you're talking about, but then also sometimes, like, I'll be thinking with the restaurant we're going to, and what do I think I want to eat, and so sometimes I will kind of just eat my protein and eat some vegetables, maybe a piece of fruit, just keep I'm coming into the dinner with my protein more or less handled. Maybe I'm a little bit short, because I usually like to eat some protein anyway, but I've saved a lot of my carbs or fat, and I will do that. It's not something I would do regularly, but if it was like one day and I'm like, I would like to go maybe 2,500 calories, and from this, whether it's regardless of how I get there, that's also something that you can do. I wouldn't say it's something you want to do frequently in terms of multiple times a week, but sometimes I'll do that.
No, that's a very useful tool. Like if you're going to go out to eat for dinner and it's probably going to be thousands of calories, then you could have like protein and oats for breakfast, and then
I would do a salad with chicken.
Yeah, exactly. The salad with chicken is exactly what I was going to say. With not too much salad dressing or light salad dressing, and then then you have a lot more flexibility when dinner time comes. And pre and post workout, you just do like a shake of whey earlier in the day if that's between lunch and dinner.
Yeah. And
then you're set, and you have a lot more flexibility when you go to the restaurant, or at least a lot more room for error. So those are great practical tools for how to incorporate eating out when you're trying not to gain too quickly.
Cool. Okay, great. So I think that probably pretty much covers at least the big bold headings of nutrition, right?
I would say so.
Cool. So now let's flip to the training side of things.
Sure. Yeah, and training, like I said, is not going to be that different than what you would do deficit or surplus.
Sure.
In the end, this is the signal that generates the potential to gain muscle.
Okay.
That you're then supporting with your nutrition. So
right. So maybe if you wanted to just drill down in, because people can listen to our previous interview and learn the basics. But how do things change then? Maybe if you want to touch on that. So how do things change on the training side of the equation? Looking at cutting versus bulking.
Yeah, it's really just a matter of being slightly, with an emphasis on slightly, more aggressive. When I'll diet someone for a show, there's typically a regular deload schedule. Mm-hmm. Like we're going to deload every fourth week or something like that, because I want to make sure you're recovered. I'm going to see how much volume I can get away with doing, in terms of not doing too much, rather. Basically taking the lower end of a volume to ensure that I'm, making sure you can recover. While during a surplus, I would probably be a little more loosey-goosey with it and start with kind of in the middle of a certain range that I thought might be appropriate. Obviously, nothing that they had never done before that was totally foreign to them, and a huge step up in volume. But certainly, you have more ability to recover from training. So, like you said, you could definitely check the last episode, but there still should be regular deloads, and tapers, and just any kind of method to the madness to where you're pushing for a while, and then you're taking a planned period of recovery instead of just going, man, I'm weak now. I don't understand.
Which is a good thing to bring up, because I run into that fair. Like it's one of the things I'll commonly ask if somebody tells me that, if they're feeling kind of run down but they're eating enough food and they're sleeping fine and whatever. It's one of the first things I ask. When's the last time you tried not beating the shit out of yourself and just gave your body a break? And in a lot of cases they haven't deloaded once. It's been like 9 months or something of really pushing it.
Yeah.
Like, well, there's your problem.
Yeah. I typically do every 4th to 8th week in someone's off season. They will take a period where it is an intended easy week, where you're doing about 2/3 of the volume you'd normally do, and an RPE, so how far you are from failure, is maybe one rep further from failure than they would be in their normal training.
Okay.
So that might be just short of failure if you're someone who's always pushing it, which maybe you shouldn't be doing, or further. And I think it's a good way to look at it is that you're going to plateau regardless, but you can either plateau on your terms by choice, and then plateau less frequently in your actual training, or you can plateau and then just try to. The problem is what people do once they plateau. Like they'll reach a natural point where their fatigue level is higher than their fitness, and they're like, oh, I don't understand. I did 10 reps last week, and then 9 reps before that, 8 reps before that. This week I only did 7. With the same load and hit failure. Like, what's up with that? I'm feeling wrecked.
Yeah.
And then, so what do? They do another set, so they'll try to find some way to still induce progressive overload, which, don't get me wrong, is a great mentality. The reason why you're probably making gains and why you're doing this in the first place is because you're always wanting to push farther than you had previously.
Yeah.
But, your body just told you, man, I'm pretty beat up. I can't recover and actually perform better than last week. And what did you do? You forced another set in there so you actually could progress. And then that continues for a few weeks until they really go off the rails, and either get an injury or just they contact you or me, and they're going, I've been plateaued for 2 months. I don't know what to do. And that's typically when you go, right, well, we need to figure out some way to get you out of the hole, which is easiest doing a deload.
Yeah.
And then B, we need to figure out some kind of method of organizing your training better so that you're not running yourself into the ground. So, an easy way is having, like a thing in your head of, okay, for 3 to 6 weeks, I'm going to be pushing to get progressive overload like I normally would. And then at the end of that, I will take a week where I'm dropping my intensity a little bit and my volume by about 1/3. That's just a rough guideline. And you could even focus that towards movements that tend to fatigue you more. So you could.
Yeah, I was going to ask on that. What about exercises?
Yeah, that's a great way to do it, especially if you're like a powerlifter or heavily focused on like the big 3. Mm-hmm. People tend to start feeling joint issues quickly when they're
that's how I personally experience, like when I get up to that point where I know that I need to dial back a bit, is I start to feel it in my joints.
Yeah, exactly. So typically the culprits are your barbell pressing and then your squat and deadlift variants. And you can definitely deload those more. Just do like one set at a low RPE. And that'll really give your ability to get some of that semi-soft tissue to recover, along with kind of the systemic recovery that would come with the deload as a whole. So yeah, I think that's important. It's probably more important than a lot of other things, because if you're inducing progressive overload and you've got a decent setup like we talked about in our last podcast, then really the emphasis should just be, okay, well, how do I manage fatigue from pushing?
Mm. And is there anything in terms of exercise selection when you're programming, a cut versus a bulk, or does that look more or less the same?
Yeah, it looks more or less the same.
Okay,
for sure. I think exercise selection for someone who's focused on hypertrophy really should comes down to personal preference with some intelligence behind it. Like you definitely want to have a solid base of compound movements. And they do or don't have to be, like the big 3 or the barbell lifts or the big 4 if you, like the overhead press or all these things. But certainly you want to have like a horizontal push, horizontal pull, vertical push, vertical pull, squat pattern, and a hip hinge pattern. And those should be your bread and butter. And then around that, you can get your single joint movements in there. You can have a few different, machines that you really like or you really feel target certain areas. And, and that's going to be true of everybody based on your biomechanics, your body awareness, and your training experience. There's going to be certain muscle groups that you may have trouble feeling.
Yep.
Typically, for most people, it's going to be a muscle in their back, or it's going to be maybe their like lateral or rear delt.
I run into it sometimes with, I was going to say pecs with bench pressing. I'll run into guys, especially guys that are new to weightlifting. They feel like all they feel is triceps.
Yeah.
or anterior delt.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, again, unless you're a power lifter, or unless you really want to be able to answer that question, how much a bench pro, then if you're not feeling your pecs, then hey, emphasize horizontal adduction more and do some dumbbell pressing. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Your pecs don't care. As long as they're stimulated, they will grow. So yeah, I see nothing wrong with that. I personally have always gotten great pec growth out of bench press, but I've
Same.
met tons of people who don't. So I think exercise selection, don't just do what you've heard is good or what you've seen your favorite athlete or model do. Is really think about, okay, I need to train all my muscle groups to get them to grow, and so what compound movements do I feel all the targeted primary and synergist movers in, and then round it out with the accessories. And that should be the accessories or secondary movements should probably be the minority of your total volume, in my opinion.
Right. And probably on the lower end of intensity, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like I don't think there's really a purpose of doing like sets of 5 on lat pull down.
Yeah.
So I mean, you could, but like for the most part, certain rep ranges sit well with certain exercises.
For sure. Yeah. Even functionally, there are certain exercises it just doesn't lend itself well to heavy lifting because it gets too sloppy, and I've run into that where I don't really feel the muscle that I want to train working properly with that amount of weight. So
yeah, and it goes the other way too. Like, sure, every person who's serious about lifting weights has done widowmakers on squats and done their 20 rep sets to failure. But what they don't tell you is that they weren't able to do anything else that workout.
Yeah,
like I literally remember going through a period where I was doing those, and I would take like a 5-minute rest period after the first set.
Yeah. The
next set I would have to take like a 10-minute rest period. The third set would make me throw up literally, and then I would get some hamstring curls done and go home. Like that's a shitty workout.
Yeah,
let's be honest.
Yeah. I remember my first 10 sets of 10. That was the worst shit ever, actually.
Yeah, there you go. That's another fantastic way of well, at least there you're getting the volume in. Enough
volume for
for a week and a half. Yeah, exactly. For 3 leg sessions.
Yeah.
So yeah, so like some things like a compound movement is valuable because you're training multiple muscle groups at once.
Mm-hmm.
To then throw a ton of metabolic and cardiovascular fatigue on top of that, that's a problem, because if you think about it, every repetition of a compound movement is going to be compounding the amount of fatigue that you have compared to an isolation movement per rep. So it probably makes sense to focus more on a low volume, low to moderate repetition, tension stimulus, and then get your high rep work that's easier on your joints, and that, like you said, lends yourself to more easier muscle activation when you're doing, machine work and isolation work. So for the most part, if you're like, I tend to keep, bench 10 reps and under. I tend to keep, my squats and my deadlifts, front squats and RDLs, like 8 reps and under.
Yep.
Deadlifts probably actually more like 6 reps and under.
Yep.
And then I'll be doing, 8 to 15 on everything else.
Yeah, makes sense. And just back to that point of not feeling a muscle activating fully or properly on a given exercise, I think it's worth just mentioning to everybody listening that, because I know just from people reaching out to me, what they initially think is that they're doing the exercise wrong. They think that their form is bad. And so sometimes people will send me videos of form and no, it looks good. Like sure, you might be able to nitpick little things, but that's not the problem. So it's just, I think, worth just highlighting that for people listening, that just because a bench press works great for me and Eric and you, Eric, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work great for everybody. And you could have the best, perfect form, spotless. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and also you tend to get these polarizing views on feeling the muscle work. So you'll get the people who will tell you, like, hey, if you're a bodybuilder, you want to feel the target muscle work in all movements. And you'll get other people who may or may not be bodybuilders who'll be like, no, just focus on form and just do it and don't worry about what it feels like. And
right.
They're both right, but I think it's exercise specific. Like if I'm doing a squat, no, I'm not thinking about my vastus lateralis. I'm just squatting. That's taking 60% of the muscle groups in my body. Which muscle am I supposed to focus on?
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
And it's a dangerous movement. Like these are high relative to other movements. Obviously, it's more dangerous to be weak and not train.
Sure.
But like a deadlift, a squat, some of these heavy compound barbell movements, heavy pressing like a standing overhead press, and even a bench press if you can if you're already feeling all the muscle groups, you don't need to focus, and you probably shouldn't focus on any single muscle group. But if you're doing like a cable row or like a lat pull down or a bicep curl or tricep push down, feel free. There's only a few target muscles you're actually trying to work, so you can definitely focus on one and get more of that quote unquote mind muscle connection. There's no issue there. But when you're doing, a complex athletic movement, you should be trying to develop movement skill, not feeling a specific muscle group.
That's a good point, actually. It's a very good point. I guess that's more just how the complaints come is like, I don't feel my pecs on the bench press because even though sure, there's more involved in the bench press, but at that moment, at that time, to them, bench press equals bigger chest. Why do I not feel my my pecs?
Yeah. And it's a little easier on the upper body lifts, but you really shouldn't be thinking about what muscle groups are working. You should be thinking about your form on like a deadlift or a squat.
Yeah, and just trusting and knowing that if you're performing a deadlift properly and you're using any amount of weight, your back is working. Like you might not, you don't you really have to overthink it. That's about it. That's all you need to know.
There's no way you're standing up without it. Exactly. But on something like a bench press, that's like we said before. You'd probably want to just try switching to a different compound lift with dumbbells, and it may sort itself out.
Yeah, I mean, you've probably seen this as well. I've seen it where so a person's in that situation, guys in particular, obviously with bench press, and then either they just keep working, and these are generally when I've come across these people that are new to weightlifting, and sometimes very new. And I have to explain to them, they're also starting with not a lot of muscle or strength. So I have to explain to them, like, this is pretty common. Let's give me a couple months of solid work on it, and then let's see. You know what I mean? So I've seen that where then as they actually gain some strength and put on a bit of muscle, they didn't realize everything that they wanted to happen was happening. It just they weren't aware of it for a little bit. I've seen that, and then I've also seen where somebody has transitioned. Okay, let's do some dumbbell pressing for a bit. And then come back to the barbell or vice versa, and now it feels right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I actually do like the bench press, or at least barbell movements allow smaller increments in load to be used.
Yeah.
So ideally, I'd like to see someone able to do them and feel everything. And you're right. When you're in I'd say the first 6 months of lifting, and if your form is actually correct and safe, just keep training. I don't think you should be trying to troubleshoot yet, because you don't actually, you're not a fully formed, you're still
you're an amoeba.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're a single cell organism. You can't even, but it just takes time to feel everything and to be aware. I mean, it's not even necessarily an issue of activation. You just don't have the body awareness yet to do that.
Yeah.
So don't stress it. Just keep training.
Totally. Agreed. All right, last thing, supplementation. Anything that you want to say on that? Because obviously...
Train hard.
Yeah. and then when you're cutting, you have to eat clean.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No. On a very serious note, supplements are... There's a small handful of them that work beyond just, spending your money.
Yeah.
And... there's fewer that are useful and effective in a bulking period, because you're not dealing with the stressors of dieting, and fat loss is not a goal. So, but be very aware that, even creatine, the most researched and probably most useful supplement for putting on strength and muscle mass, you may not be able to notice the difference of being on creatine or not. If you were to do like a placebo-controlled trial and you had to guess whether or not you were given creatine or not. And that's the most effective supplement. So it's definitely supplementary, and it may be.
And some people
1%.
Just don't respond.
That's true. That's very true. So
let me run a few by you that I know people. So BCAAs, that's very common, right? You have to fucking drink the pink water all day.
Yeah, BCAA I think are largely overrated. They're a really expensive way to get in protein when you could just be taking a scoop of whey for much cheaper. Yeah. And all of the
because obviously the pitch is like, then your body's super anabolic all day, all the time.
Yeah, you don't want that, because it's not. There's what's called a refractory period. If you're trying to take protein in all the time, I actually think it would probably be detrimental to have a constant IV of BCAA going into you, because amino acids have to compete. You actually wouldn't run into problems if you were to theoretically do that.
Right.
But anyway, the main selling points of BCAA, if you look at what studies that do blip as far as having a positive effect, what you don't realize is that you get the same effect from either taking more protein or having carbohydrates. So sure, yes, BCAAs are directly metabolized in the muscle. Yes, BCAAs, elevate muscle protein synthesis. But guess what else is directly metabolized in the muscle? Glycogen. Guess what also raises muscle protein synthesis? Whole protein that you then break down. So then people go, what if you're in a fasted state or dieting? Well, it's like, why are you training completely fasted? Well, if you feel better with performance, okay, is half a scoop of whey really going to be that much of a problem, or even a full scoop? It's not like you're going to feel completely different.
Yeah.
I rarely run into a situation where I think BCA is warranted, and I think I've seen a total of one study, and it was on cardio where it actually in a fasted state compared to carbohydrate. There's one study I've seen where a similar amount of BCA produced better performance, but. So all of the fasted track athletes who are listening to this podcast, maybe you want to consider it, but I think that's 0 people. So, yeah.
Great. What about like weight gainers?
Yeah, I mean, if you are the person who is really, really struggling to put on weight, maybe making it liquid and blending stuff together or getting a commercial weight gainer makes sense. It seems like a waste of money to me to get basically low quality whey protein and maltodextrin with a multivitamin added. You could probably just, get like peanut butter, honey, oats, and whey protein and blend it together for a third of the price. But yes, going liquid is a very useful way of getting in calories if you're really struggling to gain weight. I've recommended juicing to people, and I don't mean taking steroids, but just getting more of your carbohydrate through fruit juices as a way of getting more calories down. So I think, but don't have any kind of don't put weight gainers on a pedestal. They're really cheap ingredients sold in big bags.
Totally.
That you could easily make yourself or similar.
Yeah, I have one coming out that's not that, which is why I'm bringing that up.
Fantastic.
That's the pitch. The pitch is essentially like, this is the problem with weight gainers. So here's one that actually has nutritious, high quality ingredients. And no, this doesn't automatically help you gain weight, but this is what it does help you do. You know what I mean? Which a lot of people have asked for that because they think of it as a weight gainer or a meal replacement. You know what I mean? So
it's like bodybuilder Soylent.
Yeah, actually.
That's awesome.
That's what it's called. Fuck, how did you know? Yeah, exactly.
Sued, but I like it.
Yeah, cool. Yes, yeah. That's the idea. But okay, good. So that's weight gainers. Any other supplements that there's testosterone boosters. We can just say that they all do nothing. Don't even waste your time.
That's a decent. It's a decent way of doing it. Yeah. And even if they did boost your testosterone, would it actually help your muscle gain? Probably not with the normal physiological ranges, and they probably aren't boosting your testosterone anyway.
Exactly. And if there's whatever. There may be a couple instances like DAA that maybe in some people for 2 weeks by a little bit or shit like that. That's irrelevant, right?
Yes.
So that's that. Any other supplements that you get asked about that people associate with gaining muscle and strength that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, there's some ones that I recommend to a lot of people interested in muscle gain as it's kind of like your baseline. Mm-hmm. That would be like a reasonably dosed multivitamin, fish oil, and vitamin D3 if you don't get a lot of sunlight.
Which is most of us, really.
Yeah, I mean, there was a study that came out that said, I think roughly 80% of people in westernized countries, I forget which westernized country, but they tend to be pretty similar when I looked at surveys, are mildly deficient in vitamin D. Mm-hmm. So obviously we don't want a nutrient deficiency. And most multivitamins don't have a high enough dose of D that would probably reverse that. I think it's like 40 to 80 IU per kilogram is a decent recommendation. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right. I may be getting that a little bit wrong. So get on examine.com if you are thinking about supplementing with D3. Ideally, you would actually want to get blood work done to make sure you aren't in the 20% that's supplementing unnecessarily. But that is something to consider. And then if you're kind of like a pure bodybuilder or a pure strength athlete, it would be your creatine and potentially citrulline malate, which is shown to more recently. This is something I wouldn't even have recommended like 2 years ago. But in the last year, there's been like multiple labs that have come out and shown that it seems to be helpful with accomplishing more training volume. Mm-hmm. And then one that I've become less enamored with, as I've seen more research come out, is actually beta-alanine, which I think is probably only relevant if you're doing continuous efforts longer than 30 seconds. or 60 seconds, depending on which study or which meta-analysis you're looking at. So maybe if you're like a CrossFitter, or if you're doing, if you care just as much about your anaerobic training as you do your resistance training, that would be something to do. Or if you're the guy who's like, what are you guys talking about? I love 20 rep sets of squats and I do them every leg day. then certainly you might want to bust out beta-alanine.
One, you're psychotic, and two,
enjoy beta-alanine. It might help you be slightly less damaged. So, yeah.
Great.
That's pretty much it, man.
Yeah. I mean, HMB was going around for a bit. There was that nonsense research on it, but I think people are generally over that now.
Yeah, HMB has always been at best a theoretical benefit to when you're in a catabolic state that has never been tested outside of dialysis and people at bed rest and things like that, and typically doesn't do well in trained populations. And the studies, like you said, that have come out where it has done well, they've done really well. The stats don't look right.
Yeah,
and
better than steroids. Well,
right. Yeah, and it comes from a group that the studies they do on supplements always go well. So I would want to see replication by another group before I ever committed to that. So yeah,
totally.
I'll be honest. I don't trust that research.
Yeah. That's the general consensus. Okay, great. Well, I think that's everything. I mean, is there anything left that you think that we didn't touch on that you wanted to share?
Yeah, just go hard or go home, No, I'm just kidding.
Train insane or be the same. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
We could have just said that, actually, and then just saved an hour.
Would have covered everything. No, I think that about covers it, man.
Okay, awesome. Well, let's wrap up with where people can find you, find your work, if there's anything that you're working on in particular right now that you want people to know about.
Sure. It totally depends on what level of nerd you are. So if you really just want to get some information, how to train, and you're interested in some of the stuff I'm talking about, I would check out our YouTube channel at 3dmusclejourney.com. There's a link there to see it, where we have a lot of information for bodybuilders and powerlifters. If you really want to get into the nuts and bolts of training, I've got a couple books based on the video series I did back in the day called the Muscle and Strength Pyramids, which basically cover all of the things you need to know about setting up your nutrition or training plan. And that's at muscleandstrengthpyramids.com. Those are 2 ebooks you can check out.
I'll put links also. So anybody, awesome. if you watch on YouTube, just, if you're on the website or whatever, you'll see down below.
Awesome. And then for the nerdiest of the nerds who really want to follow the research that the Muscle and Strength Pyramids is built on, and the ongoing research that's coming out, you got to check out monthly applications in strength, sport, or mass, which is our monthly research review targeted at strength and physique athletes, or the recreational people really interested in that, and their coaches. And that's with myself, Dr. Mike Zerdos, and Greg Knuckles. And you just want to go to strongerbyScience.com/mass.
Cool. Awesome. And I highly recommend that. It's something that I promoted, and I rarely promote things, rarely ever actually. And so I highly endorse everything that Eric does.
Thanks, brother.
And then he's on the short list of people that, I read all your stuff, and I'm a fan as well. So
awesome, man. I can get into the Mike Matthews VIP club. That's what you're saying.
I'll fly you over.
The bouncer would let me in.
Yeah. So. All right, cool. Well, that's everything, man. Again, thanks a lot for taking the time. I appreciate it. I know it's going to go over well. People have been asking for it, so we have delivered.
Cool.